Hi, everybody, again. Come on in. Woo-hoo, woo-hoo. Come on in. Come on in. Come on down. And I'm going to invite you to sit as close as you can bear to sit, because it feels kind of far away. But you can also keep your space. But come on down. I expect that we'll be adding people throughout the afternoon coming in for this conference. I will introduce myself again, although because I'm not sure if everybody was upstairs at lunch. I'm Amy Cohen. I am the Assistant Vice Provost and Executive Director of the Honey W. Nashman Center for Civic Engagement and Public Service here at George Washington University. And if I can for a moment, Honey Nashman is in the last row. Woo, Honey! And when you talk about the pathways of service, as George was talking about at lunch, Honey is not just a fabulous philanthropist. She was a community-engaged faculty member here at George Washington University for 43 years, and was, go ahead. And was instrumental in the creation of the Learn and Serve AmeriCorps program called the Neighbors Project that began here in 1995. And Peter Konwerski, who was the leader of that program initially, and Emily Marson, who was the second leader of that program, are all here today, just to pull the threads together. But a personal thank you to Honey for all that she has done to support our work here at George Washington University and allowing us to be part of a national conversation. Let's see. I bring greetings to you from our president and our provost. They are out of town today because they are actually visiting a donor for whom they are doing a party. And this has been on the books for many years. And both of them send their best wishes and are excited that we're doing this, but they're in New York today. I want to talk a little bit about how happy I am to see you and how much I look forward to connecting with all of you, and we all look forward to connecting together. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Nashman Center, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't telling you a little bit about the Nashman Center. We are George Washington University's central hub for all things community service, civic engagement, and community-engaged scholarship, but also social innovation and voting. We really try to be a one-stop shop for civic and community engagement. We have a number of, so we do a big day of service at the beginning of every school year. We had 2,100 first-year students out serving on August 24th in our community. Woo-hoo! And it's a heavy lift, but it's a good lift. We also do a day of service on King Day. GW has honored the King holiday as a day of service since 1995 when it was established. We have a number of co-curricular programs. One of great interest to all of you is that we have an AmeriCorps Jumpstart program. We have been a host to AmeriCorps Jumpstart for 29 years. We were one of the first, if not the first college in the District of Columbia to host a Jumpstart program. And Rochelle Yancey, Lily Griffin, and Maura Burns lead that program where we have 90 core members, and we serve in 8 preschools with at least 270 children. We also have a couple of tutoring programs. We have an old America Reads program. Who remembers America Reads? Woo! We have an America Reads program called Smart DC, where we are doing literacy tutoring in elementary schools and math tutoring in elementary and middle schools with this year, I think, 6 partners and about 100 core, not core members, but 100 federal work study students. Woohoo! We also have a high-impact math tutoring program called Math Matters, which reached 100 tutors last year, reaching over 300 middle schoolers who are furthest from opportunity here in the District of Columbia. And thank you, Kat Peretti, who is the head of City Tutor DC, who really pulled us into this process. So we're really excited about that program as well. let's see. We also have 77, or last year we had 77 courses that were community engaged, everything from university writing to biology classes, to a number of classes within our health programs, our public health program, School of Medicine, nursing programs, led by Wendy Wagner, who's over there. Our faculty are absolutely fabulous, and last year, almost 1,000 students served in those 77 courses to do community engaged scholarship. And then social innovation. We have about $50,000 that we give away to students every year to take their ideas and make them a reality. So, I don't know, I use this example all the time. There are many examples, but this example that comes to mind is we had a student serving in the Latin American Youth Center, in the Teen Center for many months. And they turned him and they said, you know, we can't do a music program because we don't have any instruments. And he came back to the Nashman Center and said, how can I manage this? And we were able to work with him not only to get instruments, because we had some funding for it, but also to organize music students across the university to help to meet that need at the Latin American Youth Center. And that program continues onward. And then the last thing I'll talk about is our GW Votes program. How many of you are at higher ed institutions? Okay, and how many of you are doing some form of voting and electoral work this year? Basically, one-to-one match there. Really important, it's something that I've seen grow over the last 10 years. GW students vote at a higher rate than other students at like institutions. Higher ed in general voted in the 2020 election at 66%. GW was slightly above average at 69%, which is great, but we think we can do better. We are an institution that prides itself on being at the center of political activity and community engaged activity. We've set a goal for 75% this year, and I think we've cracked it in the sense that we're a national university, and our students, we want our students to vote wherever they want, but if our students are going to vote in their home communities, we want to help them be able to do that, and that means they have to start voting tomorrow. We have to get them their absentee ballots, help them figure out how to bring that in, and how to send that back. So these are the many things we're doing, and I probably went too long to talk about that. But I talk about that, I think, because this kind of a center is the kind of center that we are going to be talking about over the course of the afternoon. And some of the strategies that I've flowed out through here are strategies that came about through the networks and the systems that were created by my colleagues and some of you, many of you in this room over time. So, we chose to gather today, of all days, not just because it's the day after 9/11, which is the National Day of Service and Remembrance, but primarily because 30 years ago today, Bill Clinton swore in the first AmeriCorps members on the White House lawn. How many of you were at the swearing in? Woo, yay! I want to also start by saying we look back to look forward. We appreciate the things that have come before so that we can build on them and build better. We can learn, we can unlearn, and we can relearn. And we hope to accomplish a number of things today. We want to look back over the last 30 years and celebrate some of the significant successes of the work of national service in creating and promoting increased engagement between colleges, universities, and their communities for the benefit of the individuals in those institutions, that is primarily faculty and students, for the enhancement of those institutions. How are we changing our institutions? especially as civic institutions that play an intentional role to improve, uplift, and support the communities of which they are a part. I always have to remind myself, because it's so deeply, and it is deeply embedded, that we are doing this work for individuals, for institutions, and for communities. We want to improve, change, and better at all three levels at the same time. I should never leave this thing on. As we do our work, we're working to make sure that our faculty and students work toward reciprocity with community and toward new modes of knowledge, and that they learn to value knowledge that was already in the community. And most important, we work to make sure that the work that we do as higher ed institutions is for the benefit of those communities, again, especially those communities that are furthest from opportunity. So sort of setting that stage, we don't wish to recreate the past. We don't want to relitigate the past, nor do we want to look back at the past through the lens of nostalgia, although that's tempting. But it's not really useful. What is useful is to highlight some of the things that worked and to identify what might be useful to our movement toward community-engaged learning and the development of the multiple strands and pathways of this work. So community-engaged scholarship, anchor institutions, dialogue, teaching, university-assisted community schools, partnerships, national service. All of these pieces, we want to see how we can further that, and of course, AmeriCorps and national service. That said, I thought a quick thumbnail might be helpful about what Learn and Serve America was. I consulted a lot about, should I say this, should I do this? But I think just one paragraph about Learn and Serve America. The legislation that created AmeriCorps State and National, which was the National Community Service Act of 1990, it authorized and created funding streams for K-12 community-based and higher education service learning. These were updated and codified in the 1993 National Community Service Trust Act and in the 2009 Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act. Those laws continue to be authorized today, but in the case of Learn and Serve America, not appropriated. There are no funds appropriated for those. So the service learning programs were collectively known as Learn and Serve America, and they existed from 1990 to 2011, when funding was abruptly X'd out by the Congress with no explanation. To this day, we don't know what happened. For those approximately 20 years, all of the Learn and Serve programs collectively, K-12, community-based, and higher ed, received $40 million a year. Just a little tiny appropriation. And by law, that $40 million, 25% of that was devoted to higher education. So the higher education programs included individual colleges and consortia of institutions, such as disciplinary associations, the campus compacts, American Association of Community College, and the Association for Gerontology in Higher Education was a grantee, just a wide variety. And because part of the strategy was to seed across variety of levels in higher education, because higher education isn't a monolith. It doesn't have a single body. So Learn and Serve was never the only service funding affecting higher ed. Some higher eds then, as now, received AmeriCorps state and national funds, received VISTA funds, received senior corps funds. Much of what we're going to talk to today rests on the foundation of that funding snapshot. So all of those streams of service, if you will. So, and as I was reminded by our friend Bob Davidson, who is here someplace, there he is. Bob served many years at the U.S. Department of Education and at AmeriCorps. He reminded us that before there was AmeriCorps, Learn and Serve America, there was equity-oriented legislation that brought us Peace Corps, that brought us VISTA, brought us federal work study in the 1960s, and in the federal works, and then it brought us the federal work study community service requirement in 1972, which was then expanded in the 1990s. And in the 1980s and 90s, we had the literacy core programs and mentoring core programs at the US Department of Education. So national service and education have complemented one another and have worked together to advance K-12 and higher ed for at least the last 50 years. So we didn't start this work, and it won't disappear when we're gone. I'm reminded, Michael Smith often talks about having met John Lewis and standing on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we are continuing to do this work. The very foundation of many of our higher education institutions, indeed all of our higher ed institutions, was to create and provide service. You know, I worked at the University of Pennsylvania for a while. Old Ben Franklin said, the great aim and end of learning is service. I don't think I will ever forget that. And here at GW, we were founded to build virtuous men to keep the republic together. This is the service that we see in higher ed. What we build today was made better by all that came before it, and what we build today will, I hope, strengthen the foundation of the work that comes later. That our work to build democratic engagement will be protective, an insurance policy, if you will, for now and for beyond, to develop equitable policy, just laws, and active, engaged citizens who not only stand for racial and economic equity, but know how to work together to achieve it. What we hope today, to accomplish today, is embodied in the 4 panels this afternoon, and we are going to do a lot. So this agenda is packed with great people and great stories. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we're going. How much time? Okay. But I will go fast. I will go fast. So I'm just going to, so our first panel, I'm going to go through all the panels, and then I'm going to call the first panel. Our first panel is Significant Impact and Sustained Achievement. We have a panel that will explore some of the long-term commitments to higher education community and school partnerships that has had a long legacy and continues to have impact both on the conditions in communities and on policy for higher ed, K-12, and communities. Then we're going to switch over to strategies for systems change, organizational design, and network developments that sustain the growth and the success of higher ed, of high impact higher ed community and civic engagement programs. Okay. Then we're going to move on to our Higher Education and AmeriCorps Today panel. So many of our colleagues across the country are building new models effectively and efficiently, addressing the concerns and the conditions of the 2020s. These programs focus squarely on racial and economic equity. They focus on workforce development, jobs, and they focus on the changing climate of our planet, literally and figuratively, and they make young people's development as democratic citizens a central feature of their programs. In our last session, the Future is Now call to action, we'll hear from leaders who are going to talk about some of the cutting edge practices and what we can expect from the future. I'm so excited that John King, currently the Chancellor of the State University of New York College System and formerly Secretary of Education under President Obama, and Michael Smith, CEO of AmeriCorps, will share their action and vision for this work of braiding our resources together to create broader and deeper change. I could not be more excited to hear from Bobby Lauer, who's a deeply synthetic thinker, head of National Campus Compact, and bringing together those many complex trends and threads from that conversation. And of course, we have intentionally chosen to end the conference with the voice and thoughts of a young leader, Alex Edgar, who, while younger in years, is highly accomplished in the work of equitable democratic practice. So, this conference could easily have been 4 days, not just 4 sessions. We have so much we want to share and discuss, and we have all worked to try to put some questions in place. Now, just a few housekeeping things. Please take care of yourself. If you need to step out, feel free. The men's and women's bathrooms are outside, just past the elevator. There are all gender restrooms downstairs on the lower level, and a reminder that we can only keep closed beverages in this room. No food, no open containers. Once we've had an opportunity to hear from everyone for this conference, at 5 p.m. we will transition to the all AmeriCorps 30th reunion upstairs in the grand ballroom where we just had lunch, and we'll be able to transition and do a lot more connecting and reconnecting. Thank you. And now I'd like to call our first panel to the stage. And as they come forward and settle in, I'm going to introduce the moderator, Elson Nash. Come on, sit down. Elson's resume is a rich tapestry of community engagement and educational expertise. He's done many important and effective things to advance educational equity and community engagement in his career. He worked at the Carter Center, he worked at the Civic Engagement Office at Spelman, he headed California Campus Compact, ran Learn and Serve America, and now heads the Division of School Choice and Improvement Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. I've known Elson for many years, and his warmth, kindness, and integrity make him both a fabulous professional and a wonderful human being.
Thank you, Amy, and I can say thank her because she really helped me start my career as my former boss, and so she helped start a lot of careers, and so just want to thank her for everything that she's done and for this conference, which is amazing. So this panel, this esteemed panel, for 30 years, National Service has provided the on-ramp for community engagement and democratic learning. The foundational policies and agencies at the federal level through the Peace Corps, U.S. Department of Education, AmeriCorps, of course, and what we knew as CNCS. We see this intersection of federal policy and programs with the practice that occurs on campuses and through nonprofit partners. As Amy mentioned before, the strong legislation that initiated this work dating back to 1964, leading through the 90s with the National Service Community Service Act and a number of programs like America Reads, Community Service Work Study, and of course, the Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll. That was in 2010. This is where and how service happens on campuses to create that on-ramp for future public service. We see it now, and we've seen it before through AmeriCorps members, Climate Corps members, NCCC, and other programs within the federal government like Pathways, Peace Corps, and the Presidential Management Fellowships. These programs help to catalyze a lifetime of service to our communities. So this illustrious panel, wonderful panel, I know all of them, are campus and government leaders with a shared generalized practice of assisting young people, that creating that pathway for them to be leaders and to have a sense of democratic understanding. So we'll go in the order in which in which I'm going to say. I was going to say in which they're seated, but they're not quite the way I thought. The first person will be Maureen Tracey-Mooney, who is one of my friends and colleagues at the U.S. Department of Education. She'll tell you a little bit about her esteemed background. I won't go too much into it and embarrass her, but she's a wonderful person. We also know her as Mo. Agnieszka Nance at the Center for Public Service at Tulane University. Erin McGrath, many of you know her in a regional role at AmeriCorps, but she also was a leader within the Bonner Scholars, so she'll talk on both of those. And then last but not least, my partner in service and education, Cory Bowman, from the Netter Center at the University of Pennsylvania. One thing that I just wanted you all to know a little bit about myself that Amy didn't say. In the community, I'm also known as Easy E, for those of you who know about rap. Through my nieces and nephews and my great nieces and nephews, I'm also known as Uncle Bernie. So if you hear anyone say, "That's Bernie," and you're like, "Who is that?" That's me, Uncle Bernie. So let's get into the panel. Will each of you please give us a brief background of who you are, what you do, and how your organization invests in young people and the community? And we'll start with Mo.
Thank you, Elson. It's so good to be here with all of you. My name is Tracey-Mooney. I'm a senior advisor in the Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education. We helped coordinate policy across the department. And before coming to the department in 2022, I was the Special Assistant to the President for Education at the White House Domestic Policy Council, where I led our K-12 agenda. And the capacity, obviously, the Department of Education has many investments in young people. The piece of it I'm excited to focus on and elevate in the conversation today is our effort in partnership with AmeriCorps and the U.S. Department of Education, AmeriCorps and the White House, the National Partnership for Student Success, which is the third kind of part of the, fourth part of the kind of not quadrangle's not a word, the four-part thing. I'm pregnant, so words just disappear sometimes. Thank you. Is the Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins University. And that's an effort I'll talk about more later, but to really surge the number of adults serving in roles as tutors, mentors, student success coaches, post-secondary transition coaches, and wraparound supports coordinators in our schools and after-school programs and summer programs, really reflecting the crisis that we know we have. I think we've all seen the high impacts of tutoring, of mentoring, of these types of programs for a long time, but the pandemic really obviously exacerbated many challenges, and in the 2022 State of the Union, the president called on more people to step into these roles, supporting for adults to step into these roles, supporting our young people, and the National Partnership for Student Success was really set up to do that. At the department, obviously there's a lot of investments that support our young people when we think about the role of tutors and mentors, student success coaches, and partnering with AmeriCorps. The American Rescue Plan, $130 billion, have played a really critical role in surging those supports for students. And also relevant, particularly today, are federal work-study dollars and the department's work with AmeriCorps, with the National Partnership for Student Success, to call on and support institutions of higher education and supporting school districts by getting more college students into those roles. So excited to talk a little bit more about that later. Thanks, Elson.
Thank you. Next up, Agnieszka.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. So I have the privilege and pleasure to represent the Center for Public Service at Tulane. For those of you who might not be familiar, but Tulane is a private institution in the heart of New Orleans in Louisiana. And so in my context, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the center, but I know I'm going to dive into it a little deeper maybe later. But Tulane is one of the institutions that decided very boldly in 2006, if you kind of follow maybe a little bit history, 2005, a big disaster, natural and man-made disaster happened in New Orleans. Tulane is sort of part of the city, and sort of as a response to being a good citizen and good neighbor, Tulane instituted this graduation requirement for all of our students to participate in academic service learning or academic-based internships. So that's when the whole history of sort of Tulane's deeper engagement with the community started, and that would not be possible without the help of AmeriCorps. So we continued this partnership with AmeriCorps since 2006, and building, and I see my colleague right here, even though the light is straight in my eyes, but a shout out to Michael Pizzolatto, who is also working with this program a lot. But in detail, to tell you a little bit how that looks in practice, So when Amy was kind of like saying the numbers, this really impressive participation of students. I'm not trying to compare and contrast because, when you talk about mandatory service learning, that's an opportunity to engage 8,000 undergrads every year in sort of meaningful, academically based community engagement. But there's also opportunity for the city to receive sort of help, to receive collaboration, to receive this even innovation from young people in our university. So we work with a lot of different nonprofits in the city, from really small to really large and well-established, and it runs the gamut. But in addition to sort of service learning, we have this also traditional involvement of our students in community service through our service groups and also leadership programs. So that's sort of where I stand.
Thank you. Next up, Erin.
Hello, my name is Erin McGrath. I am currently the director of the Office of Regional Operations at AmeriCorps, the agency. I've been at the agency for about 15 years, but I'm here today because it was my experience as a Bonner student, in the Bonner, a community college student in the Bonner program, 97-ish, that sort of landed me at AmeriCorps in this sort of 25-year career at different aspects. And so I'm here to represent the Bonner program as well. The folks have a board retreat today, and we're really disappointed not to be here. And I'm delighted to brag on their behalf because I am a product of that program and the investment that they have made over time. At the core, it is a student leadership program, a college access program, primarily supporting low-income, underrepresented, first-generation college students. And to do that work well, they have built a pretty impressive network, currently about 60 campuses, who are building the infrastructure to support those students through really meaningful social action, civic engagement, and service. And so when I can't talk about I can't separate those two things. It is my experience in that program. It is the relationships that I built there. It is the things that I learned. It's the way I reflect on the work is absolutely directly connected to the work I do at the agency.
Excellent. And so I'd mentioned to Erin, I would tell this short snippet of the Bonner Scholars Program. When I was at Spelman College, I also ran Bonner Scholars. And back in 94, 95, one of my students, Bonner students, was Tracy Abrams. So I can tell you the pathway of Bonner Scholars and what they do. She was an incredible student body president, but more importantly, she was a committed Bonner Scholar. So thank you. Next up, last but not least, my man, Cory. Cory?
Thank you. I was hired at the Netter Center for Community Partnerships in 1991 by Ira Harkavy. It was a pleasure to join Amy Beth Cohen as my co-associate director. I was obviously a very junior one, and it was a pleasure to work with Amy at that time. A year later, we hired Joanne Weeks to work on University Assisted Community Schools National Network, and I'm also joined here by my colleague, Hillary Kane, who runs the Philadelphia Higher Education Network for Neighborhood Development, which is housed in the Netter Center. It's an independent organization. So the Netter Center for Community Partnerships has 55 full-time staff. We support academically based community service and service learning courses at the University of Pennsylvania. We support university-assisted community schools. It's a major focus of our work. And the third thing we do is work to help Penn become a democratic civic anchor institution. And then we also have activities to support conversations with colleagues nationally and globally about this work.
Excellent. So now we're going to have a couple of questions that each person will answer. And then after that, we will entertain some questions from you all. So the first question, this question is directed to Cory and Agnieszka. What has been the impact of academically based service in your context, and how does it relate to democracy and civic engagement? You go first. No, you go first.
Okay, that's a very good question. So we started, I think when I was hired, there were 4 academically based community service courses, as we call them, service learning courses. And so the process of growing that has taken a little while. But now we have academically based community service courses in 11 of our 12 schools. We have over 1,900 students involved in this work over any given academic year. There's only 2 things that show up on a University of Pennsylvania transcript with a special notation. For undergraduates, if you're in the General Honors or Benjamin Franklin Scholars Program, it's on there. And now if you're academically based community service. So we have been able to grow this work across schools. Faculty are increasingly incorporating this work in their own research for community engaged scholarship. And over the last couple of years, the provost at the university has created a committee that's housed in the Netta Center to advise the provost office to how do we incorporate community engaged scholarship in faculty recruiting, tenure, and promotion. So it's been a long process to figure out how to get this embedded into the institution, and it's because it's had positive impacts on our communities, as reported by our community partners. It's had positive impacts on our students, and it's had positive impacts on our faculty. So it's been building incrementally over a period of years, and we'll get into more about that in a bit.
Again, a fantastic question. I think what I mentioned is having a graduation requirement is already a sort of a game changer. That means the institution is really committed to this work. You know, having a graduation requirement since 2006 means that we're almost 20 years. We're going to actually be celebrating our own existence in the 20th anniversary of our sort of existence. But what we see is not only that sort of it became the norm that every student participates not only once but actually twice. This is our graduation requirement. We have 2 tiers. I spare you the details. This is more like a policy-wise thing, but what we realized that one element was missing, and that we focus on undergrads and we didn't have sort of the inclusion of graduate students. So there was like a natural progression to involve graduate students, and now we have this cohort of fellows who are also receiving actually a certificate in community engaged scholarship at Tulane. So while I could talk a lot about undergrads and how sort of the trajectory from smaller number of courses to sort of more involved courses, very sophisticated sometimes, to now involvement of graduate students, and furthermore, sort of focusing on specific themes that sort of are important for our communities and for our cities. And I'll give you just a quick example. You know, we probably in many cities, the issue of folks that experience homelessness is a troubled one and difficult one. And by the fact that we have those service learning courses, that there is an interest from graduate schools, that we have AmeriCorps VISTA members who are placed in different agencies whose mission actually is serving or dealing with unhoused population. This is just an example of how you can take it to level higher. And I'm not saying that everything is perfect and everything is good, but I think that we see progress and we see how things are growing and developing.
Great. This next question is for everyone, and we'll start with Erin. How has the work that you've done building networks and supporting faculty and student engagement contributed to the ability to make an impact on addressing the pressing concerns of communities?
Well, I'm gonna speak on behalf of the Bonner folks first. I'll say this. I think that for 30 years, they've cultivated this network of practitioners, and that has allowed an innovation, allowed folks to collectively innovate together and test ideas. And so what I've seen while I was in the network and then from the side cheering them on is that it's so much, we're getting so much faster and smarter at adapting to the shifting community needs as the needs change, as the issues change, to get a little bit more nuanced. There is a muscle there that allows the campuses to react more quickly, more thoughtfully, much better at incorporating multiple voices, folks who are not typically at the table. Really, like that muscle has, in my opinion, from my seat, just blown me away at how quickly folks have been able to adapt to whatever the issue of the day is, and figure out the nuance and figure out how to solve for that. I think that's the part that I enjoy seeing from my seat, at least.
Great. Mo?
Yeah, so in the context of education, obviously we have these very significant academic, mental health, other needs coming out of the pandemic. at the same time paired with really significant educator shortages, teachers and other staff. We lost 9% of all local public education jobs in just 3 months in 2020. We now have more people working in our schools than before the pandemic, which is very exciting. Teacher shortages remain. But when we were thinking about how do we surge these supports for students, a really critical part of that conversation was the answer is not just putting more responsibilities on the folks left in the building. We have to surge more people-powered supports into that. And the way to do that is through partnerships. Yes, you might have individuals call into a school and say, I want to volunteer, but a much more sustainable, thoughtful, strategic way to do that is through partnerships. So from the very beginning of the launch of the National Partnership for Student Success, which is itself a partnership between us and AmeriCorps, and the Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins, was bringing all the different large organizations, whether Boys and Girls Clubs or United Way, all the national network organizations to the table around this goal of surging these additional caring adults, trained adults into our schools to support students. So partnerships is really fundamental and critical to our work. And then specifically colleges and universities, we're really seeing increases in the number of college students serving in these roles. Where the NPSS has stepped in is really providing lots of technical assistance and also matchmaking between school districts and other youth-serving organizations with colleges and universities and others. In some places, like GW, which is part of our higher education coalition, as is Penn, with the NPSS, there's already robust ties and connections. For some of our school districts, they don't necessarily have that connection, or maybe they're in a more rural area. And the NPSS has been able to basically field incoming requests from local United Way chapters or local school districts to help them find a partner organization that can bring additional people into their building to provide those tutoring and mentoring supports. So the partnership angle has been really critical. And what we're really excited about specifically around the higher education work is how it benefits both institutions, the K-12 school district as well as the institution of higher education. We know that colleges and universities recognize the fact that the pandemic has had an impact on the students that are coming into their programs, the need for additional remedial courses and transition support. So there's an inherent interest there in college and universities getting out on the front end and helping particularly our high school students be better prepared to coming into colleges and universities. And we also know that those college students are the best advertisers for their campus as well. So we're seeing a real synergy occur between our institutions of higher education and our K-12 school districts. And there's also a financial incentive. You know, if you're a institution using federal work-study dollars to support a tutor, a college student tutor working in a school, that coverage rate is much higher than it is for regular federal work-study dollars. So there's a financial incentive as well. And the secretary has really pushed and called on, through a Dear Colleague letter, for that partnership between colleges and universities and districts, specifically saying, we don't care what funding source you use, but you get more college students into it. And if you're gonna use federal work-study funds, let's really challenge our colleges and universities to use 15% of funds for community service, not just meet that basic requirement. And as you dedicate that increase to these school-based roles as tutors and mentors, student success coaches, because we know they're higher impact, and our elementary and secondary students are really desperately in need of that support and connection. So it's been really exciting. I'll just say separately, another piece that we're really proud of is how we've worked to expand community schools, which are also all about partnerships. Woo-hoo. Yay! So the Biden-Harris administration has increased funding for full-service community schools 5-fold since the beginning of administration, which just means thousands and thousands and thousands more students are enrolled. Thank you for the applause. Yes, I appreciate that. So it's at the core of what we do, and I think if we adequately funded public education, it would be less critical But we know that we need more resources. And as an administration, we're pulling on every single lever we can to get additional resources, whether money or support or people, into our schools.
Excellent, thank you. Cory?
I think that's a great question about networks. Just a quick comment. In addition to the 1,800 service learning students we have and thousands of volunteers, we have 471 community service work study students hired by our office in fiscal year 24. 379 of those 471 worked in university-assisted community schools. So, and they leverage all kinds of resources. So it's been a key vehicle for advancing service K-16. In terms of networks, I think when I started, a lot of the network conversations were with and between civic engagement offices. What's really exciting now is we're seeing faculty networks that are emerging, and now we're even getting to the point where we're having provost and dean level networking conversations. And I was talking with Bobby about this at lunch. Chancellor King, who will be here, he invited 64 SUNYs to Binghamton University this June to talk about university-assisted community schools as a major civic engagement strategy to improve the SUNYs, improve the state, and advance community schools. And we had 24 presidents and provosts there. And so we're now seeing that they have an appetite to work together, and we've convened several conversations since then. So you can talk about his leadership about that, but it's exciting to see this networking go increasingly up the ladder of our institutions.
Excellent. Yes.
Well, I can echo everything that the panelists said already, but I think for me, two things are very important. One is partnerships, and that we're at the table also in community settings as an institution. And the second thing is to think about that we are, as an institution, very well resourced. So we can create a tremendous change, not only in our communities, but just simply how the city functions. And because of that, we are sort of also responsible for all the issues that trouble the city or trouble the region. I mean, you cannot separate those two. When we talk about climate change, for instance, Louisiana, you cannot separate the research that's being done at the university from all the issues that the communities are experiencing. I can give you the example of 2 years ago when we had Irma, and now our collaboration with the Point Ocean Indian tribe. So this is on multiple levels, right? So I'm saying that I don't think that we're at the point where we can separate one from the other. So,
Thank you. I do have one more question, but I'm going to hold that because I'm wondering if any of you would like to ask a question of this esteemed panel. So if you would like to ask a question, raise your hand, I'll point to you, and then you can ask the question. So does anyone have any questions of the panel? Don't make me do the Jeopardy music. Val? She's coming. She's coming.
The question was, who was the 12th school at the University of Pennsylvania? And that's actually a fair question. It's the vet school. It actually is partly because the vet school is the last school where our students in class from 9 to 5, and they haven't incorporated it into academic courses, but the vet school is very involved in West Philadelphia. We even have, actually it's modeled after the dental bus, we even have a bus that provides mobile veterinary care. So our veterinary students are very civically engaged, and we're going to work on the academic connection. It's coming.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Susan?
I believe that there were antecedents to the work that you're doing now with funding that was supported with funding from Learn and Serve America. For instance, America Reads was sort of a predecessor of NPSS, and a lot of our campuses were involved in the America Reads movement. Bonner Scholars, Bonner Foundation received a number of very key investments from Learn and Serve America. I think the same has gone with the university-assisted community schools. Is that right, Cory? Yeah. So, and some of the work supported during Katrina, is that right, Agnieszka, where a number of universities in New Orleans were very involved in Katrina's rescue efforts. So I just wonder if you want to reflect on the role of Learn and Serve in supporting some of these national movements that have grown significantly over time.
I'll start. So there was, towards the end, when Amy talked about in 2011, towards the end of Learn and Serve, we established, I think, a fairly innovative grant program. And that program was youth engagement zones. I think that was the initiative where we focused service around a particular area where young people had the opportunity to focus on their service. And what's interesting about that in terms of what we do at Department of Education, in many ways that was the precursor for Promise Neighborhoods, and also the work we do at Full Service Community Schools. And so that was pretty, I think, innovative, where we had the opportunity to use service and engage young people focused around a particular area.
So Susan, thank you for that question. We have those 471 students working in health and environment and nutrition and arts because of America Reads. That really gave us that base to show that we could make this work. It was beneficial for our students, very much for our school partners, and that was the growth. It also helped us leverage funds. So the Netter Center has received 18 different class gifts. So when folks come for their 5-year reunions, they give and endow scholarships. We have received 18 of those to support our students through non-work study to work in university-assisted community schools. That was because of America Reads showing the way and how we leverage additional corporate and institutional partnerships. And I now support, because Joanne had left it to me, entrusted me to try to do something with it. We have 1,000 members for the University Assisted Community School National Network, and we now have several sites across the country, and now that was because of Learn and Serve grants that originally supported those things. So everything we have done has really could be traced back to the national movement.
I'll add 2 things. One, so the Bonner Foundation is a small family foundation and had the money for the service-based scholarship component as part of the foundation, but what the federal investment through the Fund to Improve Post-Secondary Education at the Department of Education and Learn and Serve ignited the ability for that network to expand and to innovate and to practice and to build the mechanisms around the service itself. And so I think that is this room probably appreciates the importance of that work, but that's a difficult story to tell in terms of how those funds really cultivated a network, cultivated people thinking deeply about these things. On the student side, of course, the federal investment, whether it was AmeriCorps or Learn and Serve, certainly funded our expansion and our ability to reach more students and to engage more students. But the one thing that I think I would say related to Learn and Serve is that what we heard as foundation staff from campus directors in those early Learn and Serve days is that the quality of applicants coming into the program increased dramatically. It was immediate and it was noticeable and it was directly related to the experience they were getting in K-12, coming to college with more service experience, with a greater awareness. And I think that was a really exciting moment for us because we developed that student developmental model to spend that first year exploring different issues, exploring the service focus areas, things people were interested in, things that students wanted to accomplish, and they were coming, after that K-12 investment, they were coming with a point of view on that already. And I think that has continued, but I think that's an important part of the Learn and Serve legacy.
Oh my God, we've got so many questions. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon now, I guess. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit broader into the elephant in the room, which is that higher education has been taking a beating in terms of what we are doing and what we haven't been doing. And a lot of the conversation right now is not just about graduating students from the four-year universities, but also making sure that the students that graduate have the skill sets that are necessary for the workforce. I'm a community college president now. I was a part of the Learn and Serve movement, America Reads and Counts, AmeriCorps, all of it. And I'm still looking back and looking at higher education over the last 35 years and how little we've actually changed. And so the question that I have on my mind is, what can we do in terms of the civic engagement that we talk about a lot, but have not completely organized around, for instance, federal work-study reform, to the level where this is actually baked into the way that we want to do business, so that the systems actually change, so that we don't have to constantly rely on some of these other programs that come and go as a will of of Congress, right? But how can we bake this in? We've done a really good job with service learning, and I cut my teeth on service learning with this gentleman here from the very beginning. But I'm still sort of struck by the fact that the fabric of our institutions have not moved far enough over the last 35 years. And I'm still grappling with that question. And I say that because I'm at an institution, and I've been there since January of 2023. It's in Orange County, California. And it has nothing in relation to service learning, community service, AmeriCorps. It had an AmeriCorps program at one point, but it was a fad blip that happened. So it did not fully take within all of the institutions across the board. And we have to make a change in that. And that's the question that I'm sort of asking myself as we sort of look at our 30-year history and where we've been. But now, what do we need to be doing different, systemically and systematically, in order to really create the change that we need for the future?
Thank you. Excellent. Response? Yes.
I think that that's a declarative statement. Not enough has happened in 35 years. We can agree with that. We focus, and I think this is worth talking about over the course of, how do we bake this into the teaching and learning and research of the university? And from my perspective at Penn, we have come a long way, because when I was hired in '91, people thought that our office shouldn't exist. And now we have the Provost Graduate Academic Engagement Fellowship of the Netter Center. We have the Provost Faculty Fellows at the Netter Center. We have a Community Engaged Scholarship Committee of faculty from across all the schools looking at how this connects to promotion and tenure. It's not enough, it's not fast enough, but I do see change that supports service as a culture and community engagement as a level of scale of implementation, when it is connected to creating these actual activities between faculty and community partners. So I think that's the way to go. Same time, agreeing with you, we need to do more and do faster.
Excellent. Are we at? All right. Steve, and then.
Hi, David Crowley, Social Capital Inc. We're a AmeriCorps program, and I started out in the early 90s running a higher ed Learn Serve initiative. So curious about longer term impact that you're seeing on students and graduates, and specifically given the framing of this conference, wondering if you have any information on how many folks doing service learning go on to like full-time AmeriCorps positions, but also would love to hear any other like longer term data any of you might be familiar with in terms of students that engaged in service learning, what they're doing in terms of career paths versus those that did not have such experiences.
I'll start. So Larry, Bayless, and others, there was the study. Now, I don't know, do we have the links to it in the resource? We'll put the link to, there was a study Brandeis did around that issue. We'll put a link to the study in the resource section. Excellent question. And the AmeriCorps longitudinal study. So we'll get connections for those. I think there are a number of campuses that have track students who are now alumni. I gave you the example of Tracy, but Stacy. But I would just say, Agnieszka, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a data on how many students go to sort of service because some of them opt to do it later. However, we did a couple years ago sort of like a longitudinal study with a couple of generations of students graduating plus alumni. And it was more about sort of their attitudes towards public service and civic engagement. Are they more inclined to vote? Are they more inclined to be involved in their communities? And it showed a sort of like a really, I don't have the data in front of me, but it was a significant change of their attitudes towards sort of public service and citizenship and democracy.
I'll say, don't quote me on this because I feel like I'm a little bit doing this from memory. About 23,000 graduates of the Bonner program, about a third of them are in the private sector, about a third of them are in the nonprofit sector, and about a third of them are in the public sector, which in my current role, I manage the workforce that is administering all of the agency's grants and awards. And I think as a federal agency, we've done a pretty good job at recruiting alumni. What I'm most excited about now, it's not just alumni, it's folks who've actually administered programs, who know what it means to go chase down your progress report data, who know what those recruitment, it's a real thing, right? Who know what it's like to face those recruitment challenges. In my workforce of about 220 folks, about 65% of them are not just AmeriCorps alum, but they've administered programs on the ground. And I think that's a point of pride for me personally. And I think we want to continue to see that as an agency. There is a lot of data around AmeriCorps alum and what they go on to do. I am mortified that I can't rattle it off here today, but I do think there's a lot of AmeriCorps member alumni data available.
Great. Steve, you want to close us out?
Sure. Steve Culbertson at Youth Service America. My question for the panel is really about the demand side of the supply and demand concept. And that is, I remember we were with John Chambers when he was the head of Cisco, and he said, what's going on with young people today? And we're all sitting around the room, and he said, when they come into Cisco, he said they used to ask where the men's room key or the ladies' room key was. Now they want to know where the service programs are that Cisco is doing. In the same vein, Agnieszka, I was with your president at Tulane when we were doing a lot of work down there after Katrina. And he was telling us that when Tulane re-engineered itself as the service school in the United States, that admissions more than doubled in terms of inquiries and applications. And obviously, I think there is a demand by young people to, for agency, for youth voice. And I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about how are you trying to attract students to your colleges and universities? How can all of us in the room do a better job of that, of using service as really a magnet to young people, who want to find their voice and take action and make impact while they're still young?
That's a great question. The students who were engaged in service and the service learning courses, when they were interviewed to looking at impacts, for so many years they said, it's the best thing that I ever did, and I'm so sorry I learned about it as a junior or senior. Finally, at Penn, we now have this work on the admissions page. We're finally part of the campus tours. We now have students who are saying that they have came to Penn because of the Netter Center. It took longer than we would have liked, but I do think that this is now becoming something that students actually seek out. So some of this is on changing the supply on the high school side, but also part of Penn embracing the fact that this really resonates with students. So that's a fairly recent change in the last 10 years.
And I'll just say, connecting it to the same challenge with teacher shortages, we're finding young people are also much more interested in careers in service, careers in making change. And this year launched with T-Shot Oregon, 1 Million Teachers of Color, a PSA campaign focused on really recruiting more young people into the education profession, focused on that desire to have an impact and be a force of change in their communities, which I think is just such an exciting reason to be hopeful about the future. The young people that are coming up today are really exceptional in their devotion to justice and having an impact in their careers. And we're seeing that folks, anecdotally, we're hearing so much from our educator preparation programs about that opportunity to volunteer in a classroom that is then, actually, sorry, not from our EPP programs necessarily, but from colleges and universities in the NPSS, about how once they're getting into the classroom as a tutor, that's what's turning them on to becoming a teacher and entering the EP program at their school. So we see really the work of the NPSS as part of that pipeline work to get more folks into the education profession as well.
Awesome. Let's give these folks a hand. So we're going to transition to the next panel. And once again, I just want to thank all of you for hanging in there and asking great questions.
Thank you to this panel. Thank you so much. Can we give them a round of applause? We're going to keep on rolling. I'd like to introduce the moderator for our second panel, Strategies for Systems Change, Gail Robinson. While you all come up, I'll introduce Gail. Most recently, Gail has been a consultant in many areas of the community engagement field, including leading the organization and management of the Pathways for Public Service Network. Gail was the Director of Service Learning for AACC from 1994 to 2011, where she built a powerful network of community colleges committed to service learning and civic and community engagement. The AACC network was strategically designed to build and advance leadership and to simultaneously deepen community engagement in some colleges while expanding to new ones. Gail is the author of many publications and ran some of the most memorable and fun and hardworking conferences I have ever been to. Learning was joyful, and I'm glad to be able to be in joy with you again.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks, everyone. So we've already run past time, so the 10-minute break that was a 5-minute break is now a 0-minute break. But if you do need to take a break, please feel free. Just wait until I'm done talking. You can leave when they go. So I am really happy to be here today and happy to see so many of you like old faces, but not old faces, but longtime faces. And being joined here today by Hillary Kane, who is the Director of FEND, the Philadelphia Higher Education Network for Neighborhood Development. Andy Furco, Professor and Associate Chair of the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development at the University of Minnesota. And Amy Cohen, who we all know now because she's been up here speaking a few times already, here as Executive Director of the Nashman Center. We've just heard about a variety of different types of campus-based initiatives and really terrific stories coming out of the folks that were just on the previous panel. Our panel is going to focus on larger multi-campus programming that was funded by Learn and Serve America. That's this sign right here, right there, for those who didn't know, the big L. Learn and Serve, the sister program to AmeriCorps and Senior Corps in the old days, from 1994 to 2012, just because we stretched out our funding for an extra year after Congress killed the funding. Learn and Serve supported service learning in and out of the classroom, higher ed, community-based programs, and K-12. And in higher ed specifically, Learn and Serve gave grants to individual colleges and universities, as well as consortia programs to have an impact on individuals, institutions, and communities by accomplishing 3 primary objectives. And I found this on the RFP we had for our subgrantees in 1997, so I'm going to read these to you. The first, to enhance students' academic learning, their sense of social responsibility, and their civic skills through service learning. 2, to increase the number and quality of sustainable opportunities for students to serve.
And 3, to engage students in meeting the educational, public safety, environmental, and human needs of local communities. So those of you who were grantees back in the day might remember those 4 things specifically for your performance objectives that we all had to fill out. We know that service learning is one of a few proven high-impact practices for student success. AAC&U has been a leader in determining those things. The language has changed over the years, morphing from service learning and civic responsibility to civic engagement, democratic learning, civic learning, community engaged learning, but all of those terms refer to getting students out into the community. 30 years ago, the American Association of Community Colleges, based here in DC, received a Learn and Serve America consortium grant to implement service learning in community colleges nationwide. I was hired to coordinate AACC's national service learning initiatives 30 years ago next month, and served in that role for 18 years until our funding expired. Over the years, we conducted research that showed community college students who participated in service learning were more likely to stay in school, develop leadership and workforce skills, directly answering your question, Jeannie, complete their educational goals, and be more involved in their local communities. Along with AACC, the Arizona-based Community College National Center for Community Engagement had a consortium grant. Between our 2 organizations, we funded and trained community and technical college faculty in all 50 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. We funded historically Black community colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, and tribal colleges. Given that our sub-grants ranged from just $3,000 to $16,000 each year and reached more than 50,000 students and faculty over that 18-year period, you can see that our consortia programs resulted in a big bang for the federal buck. Consortia grantees like AACC, Campus Compact, both state and national, the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, UNCF, the College Fund, the Council of Independent Colleges, and many other organizations worked strategically and collaboratively, resulting in a greater collective impact on our students, faculty, and community partner organizations. The systems we built helped us develop and share resources for our sub-grantees, collaborate on training opportunities, and spread service learning best practices across higher education. We did a lot with a little. We were effective, intentional, and strategic in our partnering. We used our networks and the collaborative field of community engagement to get a lot done. Even higher education and academic disciplinary associations that weren't national service grantees helped contribute to the field by broadly disseminating information about community engaged learning through their publications, conferences, trainings, and webinars. But none of that would have happened to the extent that it did without federal support from Learn and Serve America. Learn and Serve funding proved transformative, particularly for smaller institutions that didn't otherwise have budgets for travel and professional development. These kinds of events were key for faculty and staff to learn about what was happening in other states, many community colleges especially. Those folks don't even travel outside their county. They don't know what's even going on within their state, much less across the country. But it provided opportunities for them to replicate what they found in other programs. Learn and Serve America changed the culture, infrastructure, and policies at institutions nationwide. Now here we are, 12 years after federal funding ended, and community engaged learning is embedded in campuses across the country. The core is still there, service learning is still happening, but continued growth is a matter of administrators' priorities and budgets to fund faculty development. That's where Learn and Serve funding really made a difference. As long as faculty are trained and community partners are brought in as co-educators and students have a voice, community engaged learning will continue. And now it's time to turn to our panelists, and I'm going to start with Andy Furco. So Andy, we've known each other a long time. You started working with Learn and Serve America when you were teaching at University of California, Berkeley. Learn and Serve brought curriculum-based service into both K-12 and higher education systems, and you've worked with both. Can you speak about national service and Learn and Serve funding as a catalyst for the growth of the field of service learning and community engagement in the US and beyond?
Thank you so much, Gail. Hello, everyone. So nice to be with such magnificent company with kindred spirits, who are doing such amazing, dedicated work to this field. And it reminds me of why I got into this field and why I remain in it. So it's so great to be here. Thank you, Gail, for the question. So yes, for sure. the service learning funding, Learn and Serve funding, but I would say the Learn and Serve initiative wholesale was really quite a catalyst for advancing service learning in our educational systems, primary, secondary, and higher education for a number of reasons. And I think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that when we just did a chapter on the history of service learning in the United States and Canada, and we pointed out the important impact that Learn and Serve had on our field, and in particular in the area of field building, that one of the things that Learn and Serve did was really provide those spaces, those opportunities, those networks for peers to get together to unpack what exactly meant to do community service. And when it came to educational systems, the National Community Service Act was really, in large part, about engaging young people, people of all ages, but especially young people, in service activities. But when it came to educational systems, the question was, well, what does that mean for schools? What does that mean for universities? We know that most students, most young people, spend a large portion of their time in schools and educational systems. So the idea was, how do we get community service connected to the priorities of educational systems? And that's where the Learn and Serve initiative, Learn and Serve funding became so very important. It provided an opportunity to build understanding of what it meant to build a field of study, of practice, of bringing community to be able to say this is important. And that catalyzed a lot of movement, a lot of momentum along the way. Built, I think, for us, an opportunity to really think about what does it mean for educational work? What does it mean to engage students in community service? And that provided legitimacy issues. It raised questions about evidence. It raised questions about impact on the students and the community. So it catalyzed research. It catalyzed conferences. It catalyzed publications. It catalyzed forums for us to build this field of service learning. We talked about how it continues, despite the fact that funding has ended. It wasn't so much only the funding, which was important at the time, but also the fact that we were able to build this field. Now, funding is important, obviously, because that sustains and brings people together to be able to do that field building work, but I think that's one important piece. I think the other couple of things I want to point out is that it also helped really think about what does it mean to be an institution that is connected to its community. We talked about this in the previous panel, but it catalyzed this whole transformation of thinking about service learning only as a set of projects and programs, but really as an institutional mission, as core to what we do in higher education and across our educational systems. And it elevated the centrality of community engagement as a core feature of what we do. It's not just a nice thing to do. We talked about now the transformations in promotion and tenure guidelines, in faculty come to my university saying, I'd like to come work at the University of Minnesota. Do you support community engaged scholarship? Do you support service learning? So there's a new generation of scholars and educators who see this as core and important because they've experienced it when they were going through education, their educational experience. So the catalyzation for sure has happened, but beyond just programs and impact, it's really about what it means for educational institutions. And lastly, I just want to say, in the early years, service learning was a US phenomenon. The conferences were here, the publications were all in English. This is where we did the work. This is now a global phenomenon. And a lot of it is due to that early work that Learn and Serve catalyzed and built for US field that now has grown exponentially and globally. Many education institutions in various countries now require service learning as conditions for graduation or as part of the educational experience. So I would say there's a big catalyst that's happened with Learn and Serve. And again, I think that this is something that's going to continue because of what service learning was able to do for us.
Thanks, Andy. So can you also talk about the impact Learn and Serve had on faculty research and curriculum development a little more broadly?
Sure, absolutely. So I think in particular, the networks that you and others facilitated were essential because it brought together the educators, the faculty who were doing the work. And I thought what those institutes, those professional development opportunities did through the networks and the professional associations as well, like Campus Compact, Elson, and others involved, Bobby. What those associations, those networks did was to demonstrate that this is not just, service funding is not just something students do. Community service is not just something students do, but actually it's what faculty do as well. That educators and faculties have a responsibility as well to be connected with communities, to look at their own work and what contribution we are making as faculty members in our scholarship and in our teaching to society. And so it elevated the importance of this among faculty work. So promotion tenure guidelines have been revised specifically around this issue. And I think those networks that Learn and Serve catalyzed at the very beginning, those consortia, really helped us reflect on what does it mean for faculty members to do this work.
Hillary, can you tell us a little bit about FEND, what it is, how it works, and how Learn and Serve America funding helped you build a local network and develop partnerships in the greater Philadelphia area?
Sure, thanks, Gail. So FEND, I think, is a pretty unique example of what was done with Learn and Serve funding. As Amy mentioned, as Gail mentioned, some of the examples of the national higher ed networks that received funding, disciplinary networks, we took the funding and used it in a local context. And so FEND has about 25 member campuses in and around Philadelphia and its suburbs. We have Research One universities, community colleges, faith-based institutions, secular, liberal arts, technical schools, you name it, pretty much HBCUs. We have almost every type of institution in our region. And our unique sort of focus as a network was on the city of Philadelphia itself and the region. And so I think, instead of having a disciplinary focus or a certain type of institutional focus nationally, we were able to leverage that funding in order to basically build a network. And while we did certain programming and re-granting, like many others, we had course development grants for faculty, we did a lot of training, we launched our annual conference, which still goes on to this day. I really spent a lot of time in the early years just meeting anyone and everyone in the area who was doing interesting stuff, right? Whether, on the campus side, the community side, K-12, and really just trying to sort of weave it together, build this network. And that is what has been sustained, I think, over the last, 25 years in my tenure, is that this large group of people who are interested in some part of this, what we have taken a pretty broad approach of campus community partnership, civic engagement, public scholarship, doing good things with the resources of higher ed in partnership with communities.
So how did using other grants and programs like AmeriCorps members, which you've had,
Sure.
How did that help you leverage and build capacity to get things done?
So we have been a beneficiary of the AmeriCorps agency's funding, everything but Senior Corps, I think, for many years now. And, I think we currently use AmeriCorps funding to continue some of this work. It's not quite a perfect one-to-one match and a fit. We have what was, I think in the old days, sort of an AmeriCorps Ed Award-only program, so we do, similar to Bonner, where we do minimum time positions for college students. And while we obviously bake in a lot of reflection and professional development, it's not quite having that sort of course-based impact, connection. And so, I think what we've done is our best to, in the broadest strokes, keep the work going through other streams of service, to use that term, which I completely remember. But it's just not quite exactly the same thing. And I think, but nonetheless, we're still here using whatever resources we can to still carve out space for that networking and field building that Andy talked about. Because I think our approach was always, it's not just about running a specific program or managing this specific type of grant. And while we did all that and, the deliverables and outcomes, it was really always about building this broad base of support and bringing new people into the tent, making sure that there's this sort of baseline infrastructure so that when the next challenge comes along, we have a network of people who we can rely on. And so, over the years, we've had all kinds of, things. When COVID happened, obviously, had calls with our civic engagement directors and State Department of Public Health. What can we be doing? When NPSS comes along, we organize our civic engagement directors and say, all right, how is everybody responding to this? And so because we have this network, we can leverage it for whatever the issue of the day is, as well as trying to keep, of course, things going from previous eras.
So what's been the response by members of the community? So people who are parts of either your partner organizations or recipients of service, do they realize that FEND exists, or is that something that is just sort of a diffuse, some organization out there?
I think it really depends. Sometimes I joke, and this, is dating myself to whoever remembers the old BASF commercials. Does anybody? And I don't even know what they did, but their tagline was, "We don't make the products you buy, we make the products you buy better." And so sometimes I think of FEND as that kind of like behind the scenes role, like we're not doing the actual service in the community, but we're helping, all the folks do that better, right? And so I think for a lot of organizations, they may know that they have, Penn students in their midst, or Temple students, or Community College of Philadelphia, but that's it, and I think, certainly at large institutions, they don't even distinguish, this student's coming from the academic side of the house versus the co-curricular side. I mean, they just know they have folks, and they're, happy, or not, depending on the case. But I think, we also have, some folks might know of our weekly newsletter that's been going for 30 years, 25 years, and we do get a lot of, community partners and random Philadelphians and others who sign on to that newsletter. And so there is, some recognition, I think, from folks who are directly connected with us about what our role is. But it's hard to explain, right? Like we're this convener, connector. We bring people together. We try to feed them, right? Like it's a little, indirect from the actual day-to-day work.
I think that's probably pretty common across a variety of consortia programs, that the people that it really affects don't know where it's coming from. They may not even have an idea that there's federal funding behind it. Or in the old days, there used to be federal funding behind it. Yeah. Amy, so you started out at Penn, another Learn and Serve America grantee, before working at Learn and Serve as a program officer and then director, and now here at GW. Can you talk about the development of campus-based centers, which we heard a little bit about in the previous panel? Centers for Service Learning and Community Engagement, and how they helped propel a movement in higher education.
I would be happy to. I think, listening to Andy and Hillary, centers play a very similar role on campuses in terms of networking systems and connection that your networks, or the networks you talked about, played. The inception of these networks, I've been told, the story goes, that there was a great groundswell of students in the late 1970s, early 1980s who wanted to do community engaged work, who wanted to do service, and that they lobbied their institutions to create these things. That some of them were doing it on their own through student orgs and stuff, but they wanted a greater connection and continuity across the country. And so they lobbied this. I think I learned this story from the Campus Outreach Opportunity League, which went around and did some of that work across the country. And some of our friends who ended up being at the Bonner Foundation through Rhodes Scholars. But some of that came up through that grassroots student push. We know that some of the larger campuses had their own, larger and richer campuses had centers that they were able to put together. But again, it came from, even those came from student pushing. So I think one of the things that we were able to do with Learn and Serve funding was support the development of those centers at campuses that might not have had the same level of resources. now, Learn and Serve never had enough money to pay for a full person at those centers, but was able to provide some seed support to support a director. That always had to be matched with funding from the community or from philanthropy, from the university or from philanthropy and maybe the community. But and those people then began to create the programs on the campus, and it created, often that was the locus of where community service federal work study was run out of. And then when America Reads came along, which was sort of a real national program beginning in 1994, 95, all colleges were asked to use their federal work study for tutoring. That also led to the creation of these nodes on the various campuses. And the function that they provided was not just for the one thing. They became this kind of a one-stop shop for co-curricular community service, student-driven community service, and community engaged scholarship. So all of those pieces came together, and by having that node on the campus, it was able to connect to the other nodes, whether through a place-based network or a disciplinary-based network or a type of college network. I think really made that difference, and it was the place to go. When the community called, sometimes I would get calls because people were looking for community service because people had done something wrong. But most of the time when people were looking for community service, then there was suddenly an office that could manage that.
So when you were director of Learn and Serve, you saw a lot of collaboration across federal agencies like the Department of Ed and HUD, for two examples, as well as private foundations. So how do those types of cross-sector partnerships contribute to campus infrastructure and culture and help colleges and universities meet their missions to serve the local communities?
I think the money is always nice, right? So the resources that came from the U.S. Department of Education for Federal Work Study through the FIPSE grants, the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education, the funding that came from HUD for the COPSI grants, the Community Outreach Partnership Centers, which really concentrated funding. Then there was funding also through other agencies to support this work. I think the funding was really nice, but what I saw often was literally just the good housekeeping seal, that this is something that the federal government thinks is worth investing in. And by having that good housekeeping seal, it allowed other resources to flow. It gave others in positions of power, others in positions to make those decisions to make that happen. It also built big national programs that were able to have an impact on a much larger scale, as Mo was talking about with the National Partnership for Student Success. By seeding this across campuses and across communities, a much bigger impact could be made on reading by fourth grade, for example. The other thing is that it built a network in the federal government. So while those programs were going on in colleges and universities, places like NIH and the CDC began to add requirements for community engagement for their grants. They didn't function always completely the same way, but community engagement became very important to their funding. National Science Foundation to this day has very strong community engagement programs, and part of that is it's people, right? It's Judith Ramaley who did that, who was a community engaged faculty member and then president, and then went over to the National Science Foundation, and Barbara Holland, who did it at HUD, but they didn't always start it. Barbara was there, but she didn't always start it. So there were these opportunities to bring this across the federal government and really drive community engagement deeper.
I remember some of my grantees who got smart and had their grant folks start writing service learning into other grants that they were applying for, so that in their proposals, they stood out from other institutions because, hey, look, they're doing this cool service learning thing, and they would usually get the funds. So that was always a good move. Okay, so thanks, Amy, and now I'm gonna give a question for all of you that then I invite the rest of you to address as we're moving into the future, it's important to acknowledge that we are in a new era. College and university students are not the same as they were 30 years ago, and neither are we. We are in an increasingly digital environment where methods of communication are constantly changing. Students' motivation to take action and make change is different, and the issues that are important to them are different. So how do we make service learning relevant to today's students, as well as to faculty in the broader field of community engagement? Social media and AI didn't exist when most of our programs began. Do we need to modify the language they use? Is it just a matter of the semantics? How do we reach students, especially in a digital world? And what does all this mean for the future of higher ed and national service? Just a small question, just a small task.
Well, I could just jump in very quickly, and that is to say, I think during the pandemic, it really showed us what technology and digitization can do for our field, and that is being able to connect in ways that perhaps we were not thinking about connecting previously. And now these very elaborate, complex community engagement service learning initiatives on a global scale are happening, where there are these affinities around specific social issues that young people around the globe are saying, I want to connect to that and I want to do something in my own community and share it with other communities. And then at some point want to gather at some place or in some forum, whether it's virtual or in person, because of the work that they've done. So it's really catalyzed actually a lot of opportunities that perhaps weren't thought about previously.
I would also say that there is still something to be said for the in-person, human scale of the work. And I think that especially as we, keep emerging out of the pandemic, we're seeing an increase in the number of students and young people who want to, in some ways come back to in-person service. And who are starting to, I think, appreciate in new ways the value that type of in-person connection can bring. I think we are challenged to adapt and to figure out, what is the right, does it have to be 100% in person, or, what is the right amount of, virtual versus face-to-face, and, I think I've always had this sort of view that the language is just semantics, and I think perhaps that's no longer really the case, and that we do need to change. But I think the core, for me, it's about the core values of the why, and it's about making positive change in the world. And that is clearly something that is, obviously still quite important and necessary. We have not solved all the world's problems. And our folks, our students, our members are still very much engaged in that. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to adapt. I don't know it's a full-scale redesign. It's just more of, adjusting and changing. And I think, and I think there's also just a lot more expectations from everyone about flexibility, whether from your employer in the workplace, from your institutions of higher education. And that, I think, is something that we're also grappling with, while still trying to, remain in compliance with federal regulations from various funding streams. So yeah, I think that those are the frontier challenges that we have.
I would say that we got to listen to the students and see what it is they want us to do. I think the new opportunities for with media is democratizing, so it makes communication much easier, much more immediate, and I think that our students want to be in person often, not always, but often. They want the opportunity to get together on these issues. But I think we have to do what we should always have been doing, which is to listen to the students about how they want to engage. I will also say that for most of our service, it is in person. The agencies and the community partners that we work with do not want us online. They want us to be in person. The District of Columbia Public Schools, no, sorry, we're not doing online tutoring. So I think that we have to listen to our students, we have to listen to our partners, and we have to engage them together to come up with the things that that we'd like to, most appropriate to do together that meet everybody's needs.
So if you take the lead from students, how do you work with, let's say, recalcitrant faculty that might not want to be moving into the 21st century in 2024?
I just don't. I mean, yeah, I have no mandate to work with everybody, so it's the coalition of the willing.
That's right. I was going to say the same thing. I also think, what's happening is there's a lot of self-organizing that's happening through technology, social media in particular. We had an incident several years ago where there was a fire in a neighborhood near our campus, and the students self-mobilized. Through social media, they were able to get support. They were GoFundMe page. They were able to harness volunteers and just coordinate things in no time. And so there's a lot of advantages as well. I mean, if we were trying to do it through the university, it would take a week to get the message out, get it approved, and making sure that the language, branded it. Yeah. So there's quite a bit of advantage as well that we want to optimize in this work.
Yeah, and then maybe I'll just add, I didn't want to sound too flip before, but, certainly I've worked with faculty who, I always say, like, we meet people where they're at, right? Faculty, students, whomever. And of course, try to bring them along and get them, to expand their thinking, try something the first time, do it a little bit more, a little bit better. So, I think there's always a way, but at some point, there's enough people who are calling my attention for good that I don't need to waste too much time. Yeah.
I mean, I think new things bring new people, and we engage them as we can.
Okay, now it's time to toss it out to the audience. We still have 2 microphones being carried around, I'm hoping. So if you have a question, please look for one of those mics and ask away. It's hard to see from here. How many of you are dealing with recalcitrant faculty? Oh, there we go. There's one.
Hello. Thank you so much for the information that you're sharing with us, your experiences, which is very valuable. One thing that I do a lot of community engagement, going out in the community, meeting where the people are, and you get a lot of requests. And with the school system, what we are trying to do and connecting the students, do tutoring and all of that, what we are facing right now is the issues of transportation, big time bringing snacks where we're doing any food, because there's so much food insecurity. And the big one is the background checks. So I just want to feel, how do we, because this is not sexy to us, a nice philanthropy, I need for transportation and for background checks. That doesn't cut it. So I'm trying to see how have you handled that, because these are deal breakers. And then that's it. So I just wanted to get your sense, how have you find ways to get some fun? And the GoFundMe is great, but sometimes for those issues may not be as great.
I feel like Amy and I could probably lead a seminar on just background checks that will be happening across the lobby. Right, I mean, this is the day-to-day, just minutia to get this, because it's not just the background checks, right? It's the personnel to manage the complexity of the background checks and to keep things in compliant file. I mean, yes. I mean, I think in our case, we do it because through AmeriCorps, and so that is what funds, we use AmeriCorps funding to cover background checks. I mean, I think it really is about educating your funders, right? I mean, it's so hard, right? Funders want to fund, the food on the shelf of the food cupboard is sexy. The shelf itself isn't, right? And yet, it doesn't happen if there's no shelves. It doesn't happen if there's no building. It doesn't happen if there's no volunteer manager that gets the person in the door to then get the food out, right? And we just have to constantly be educating people about what it really takes to do all this stuff, right? It isn't sexy, but it's what's necessary. I mean, either that or you get them to, you know, fund some shiny new thing and you take the money that was going to go to that and, you know, put it to, you know, pretzels and background checks, right? But that's, you know, not an insignificant part of our budget, and time and effort is on all that compliance and just the logistics of getting it done.
And that's why centers have been so important, because they are the people who are doing that. But the other thing I would say is that the background check industrial complex is something that we really have to address. And the issue is that they don't speak to each other in a private way, and it actually is a great engineering service learning project to figure out how to do privacy background checks that can report all across. Our Jumpstart Corps members have to do DCPS background checks and Office of the State Superintendent for Education and AmeriCorps background checks, and we just have to do all three. And it doesn't cost us any money, but it costs time, which means a loss of students, or a student doesn't get out serving until the middle of October, and then, you know, then they're done with their course, if that's what they're doing, 4 weeks later. And that's the problematic piece of it. So I would charge, you know, any advocacy and lobbying folks here to really think about how can we work together. I mean, we do have the National Registry of Sex Offenders, right? There's one registry you go to. If there was a way that we could share that, that would be a big plea. Not sexy, not fun, but it would make things a lot easier. The other thing I would say is we are paying for lifts, and we have built it into state and federal grants because, as I love to say this all the time, development follows the metro. So we have the metro here, but now most of the folks who live along the metro, whose schools are along the metro and community centers are, they don't need us as much. They don't need the service as much as places that are further from it. So we're now investing in Lyft significantly. And we are working with them to find ways to reduce that cost. And we're lucky we have a very small endowment from the class of 2006 that throws off a few $1,000s every year, and we have dedicated, that they gave to the Office of Community Service here, and we've dedicated all that funding to transportation, but it's not enough.
Another question? Yep, over here. One there. Two there.
There we go. Amy, this is for you, and it's really a question about the training that's available out there for teachers K through 12 higher ed, because there's certainly an impact on higher ed from, you know, students coming in, again, back to that student demand and expectation. Hey, we did this in middle school, high school, we want to do this in college. YSA just launched a new partnership with ASU, Arizona State, with an online course with their School of Education to train teachers on how to do this work, which we're really excited about. But we don't want to be the only ones out there doing it. It's an entry level. It's primarily for educators. You can use it for after-school programming, you know, youth development programming, but primarily, you know, K through 12 higher ed. Where is the training happening out there? Where do we see, you know, the systems changing? Because without Learn and Serve, again, I hate to harp back to that, you know, a much smaller service learning conference than we used to have, very little about service learning, you know, in the larger Points of Light conference. Where are we seeing the training? And if a teacher wants to do this, what other resources available to them?
They're eclectic as far as I know. They're sort of college by college, place by place, and Andy may know more about this. But I would say that just before I hand it over to you is Civics now. We really should think about how are we partnering with the civic education folks and all of those folks to drive this kind of training into schools. We had programs, AACTE, we had a great program in Brooklyn and in Hoboken, but those did not remain. So we need to work on it. But Andy?
Yeah, a great question, Steve. I would say a couple of things as we think about the pipeline, especially in the K-12 system, to higher education service learning and how we train our K-12 educators. There are a number of certificate programs now. NYLC is running one, National Youth Leadership Council runs one. They do quite a number of professional development activities for K-12 teachers. And a number of school districts as well have professional development around service learning, oftentimes tied to other important initiatives: service learning, character education, service learning and social emotional learning, service learning and school to career. So they see service learning as a strategy to accomplishing these other important initiatives and goals that they have for students. So service learning becomes the instructional practice that is used for social emotional learning or for character development or career preparation. So there are a number of, LAUSD, for example, has a service learning requirement, high school requirement. So there are Los Angeles Unified School District. So there's a number of school districts that are doing this. And I'm not sure at the state level, but I would assume there are probably some that are supporting those professional development opportunities.
So I agree with what you said about what Gail calls the red light faculty. That's the recalcitrant. And I want to come back because we had a university president say something very profound, which is we really have to focus on systemic change. And so the question about the yellow light faculty, right? What are we doing in terms of institutional recognition and rewards? What are we doing in terms of graduate fellowship programs to change the future professoriate? What are we doing to make sure that this is something that's recognized on the transcript or part of faculty recruiting? How are we creating dossiers that can be given to committees that are examples for how do you get tenure in this work by putting those together and distributing those around for both internal and external reviewers? Those are a handful of things we're doing. We just want to get the committee to respond about the systemic yellow light question in addition to the red light one.
Yeah, absolutely. This has to be part of institutional agenda. It can't just be about programs and projects and individual units doing this work. That's why we need presidents like President Kim who have an understanding of this work. That's why we need senior level positions. And increasingly, those who have been involved in service learning are in senior level positions to advance this work. And that becomes important about the policies and the culture. So issues around background checks and liability and transportation, all those things have to be handled at an institutional level. For example, in my institution, we pay for background checks for those that are involved in community organizations that don't have the capacity to pay for those things. At least we used to. I don't know if we do anymore. I'm not in that position anymore. But to your point, promotion tenure guidelines, awards for community engaged scholarship. P&T committees, for example, say, we're seeing more and more scholars coming in doing community engaged work. We don't know how to review this work. So we established an Engaged Scholarship Review Committee, scholars, faculty, tenured faculty at our university from different disciplines who serve as internal peer reviewers who understand high quality community engaged scholarship and can say, yes, this is high quality community engaged scholarship, this is not. So there are mechanisms that have to happen, but it has to be part of an institutional agenda.
And I would just add, and I think Marisol left the room, but the Carnegie Classification for Community Engagement is an excellent tool to use to pull those pieces together so that we can advance that within the institution, because again, it's that external look at how your institution is doing. And there are other programs like that, but that's the key one.
Okay, we've got time for one last question, and you've got the mic up there.
How are you hearing about, or how could you anticipate better leveraging accreditation?
That's a powerhouse one. The HLC, which is the one we're under, looks at how institutions are incorporating more civic involvement, civic participation in the core, the centrality of that within the overall mission, and how we're fulfilling our service mission and outreach mission with communities, not just through our third mission, but also through our research and teaching. So it's become much more important, and in the five campuses we have, all of the senior leaders, as we're going through this, are very much attuned to how we're going to represent that. What's interesting is that there is a lot happening on our campuses, and what programs like Learn and Serve and others do is lift the veil off of those and allow us to really see what's happening and bring that sense of working together and building that coalition of effort to see this as an institutional approach and not just an individual programmatic approach. And I think that the accreditation boards are really putting pressure, as the National Science Foundation, as institutes of health. You know, I would get calls, I have a grant due next week and I need community partners because I have a grant, an NIH grant. And I'm like, well, good luck, right? So, but that's definitely happening. It's definitely changing how people are looking at this.
Thanks.
And I would just say quickly, Transform Mid-Atlantic did a series of seminars on accreditation with Middle States Accreditation Board that are up online and available, and they're really fabulous about how accreditors are thinking about civic engagement.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you for your good questions. And we are now ready to take a 10-minute break before we roll into the next panel, which is AmeriCorps and Higher Education Today. So you'll hear from a lot of other higher ed leaders and AmeriCorps members about their experiences and how they are working together. So thank you very much. Oh, but quickly, one more thing. Yes, Emily? Oh. All right. Thank you, Emily. Thanks.